Okay, guys. Well, were any of you, by the way, were any of you on the IACP talk today?
Yes, I was.
So how did you think that went?
I thought it went good. Uh,
Okay.
I really the bit about not what was it? Not having dogs further apart than 10 feet to create where it would create two separate packs. I'm sure I've heard you say that before, but it just stuck differently this time for me.
Not specific. Dogs are unfamiliar with themselves or they're just coming back together in that way. So, okay, good. Well, I hope that came across well. And so, you know, how do you limit a subject that size down to, that and just kind of pick up a part of it out of the middle and try to explain as much as possible. That's essentially every one of these talks too. So, okay. Well, hopefully it came across well to others there. I'm not sure how many they had. I think they had the last, I think yesterday they said they had 48 or 50 signed up. So,
Yeah, I saw like 45 on there.
okay, good, good. Uh, okay. Well, now this subject, this is, okay, you guys know that the whole purpose of these live talks is to talk about a very narrow subject that while I may go into some depth on in some of the different classes, the advanced format gives me the opportunity to do a very deep dive, not covering everything that's possible, obviously, because that would, be the depth of the ocean instead of a small lake, but enough to give more of the information out that essentially it's for, these live talks are meant to continue education on your part, between classes if you ever take classes, from us or anybody else. It's basically just a monthly continuing education opportunity. And typically I'll do a very narrow line subject and try to go in depth so that you can begin to understand all the elements to start relating to other things, at least the major elements, to start to see how that one subject matter relates to everything else in some way. And that's kind of the whole concept behind the live talks. On this month, which is the working dogs and its lessons learned from training them. And I should have put in working and service dogs, but I'll just say working type dogs, because I've training and working with them have obviously affected how I work with all dogs and what I teach as a general rule. So this one is more of a broad. I had to take a different focus and a different tact on this one, uh, and it isn't. This is more of a. This is more of a talk about how you must do certain things. So the lesson, rather than the lessons of, this dog did this and that and et cetera, et cetera. The way I looked at this one was what you need to know and do to be more successful at teaching, training, working with, and creating a working or service type animal. And anything that those types of animals to do or become is in some cases a life and death situation. Working with creating search and rescue dogs, that's definitely a potential life and death situation. So, and obviously, medical alert dogs or mobility assistance dogs or those, any type of alert or detection dogs, those certainly can be life or death situations. You know, again, going back to Bosch, Bosch was not limited to me as far as, and if you haven't been around service animals, yes, they're focused on with you essentially. They're your partner, but anyone else around them, they can obviously detect things with them too, as a medical alert, for instance. And so, you know, back in December, my daughter had an issue we didn't know about. Bosch did. He went and alerted on her about 30 minutes before she collapsed and nearly passed out. And soon as I saw she was, you know, clammy and white and, you know, just laying there, drained face. And I told my wife to, because we were engaged in doing stuff there, I couldn't get out of it instantly. So I told her to get her to the hospital immediately. And so she spirited her off, and they surgery almost immediately and had to close her up inside. She had not inside, she would have died. So, you know, Bosch being detection, understood that there was something wrong with her before any of us knew it. And same thing, he alerts on my wife, he alerts on me, he alerts on anyone else that is of importance to him that's around us, for any period of time. And he's usually about, unless it's an emergency situation like it was with my daughter, if we're getting ill, he's usually 2 to 3 days ahead of when we actually feel it. You know, my wife kept denying each time he'd alert on her for, you know, day after day. And then, well, I feel fine. I'm going, you're sick. Trust me, you're sick. Go to the doctor. Well, but, you know, all that stuff. And then the third day she's going, okay, I'll make an appointment for the doctor. Yeah. And sure enough. And I had to learn my lesson with him on that too. So, you know, a dog that has those senses, those capabilities, and every dog has the ability to detect, certainly through the nose, those sorts of things. They're just not trained to alert us, to tell us that they smell this stuff or that there's something going on. So really training a dog to tell us what they sense, feel, smell, see, hear, that's really all we're doing. Because they already have those capabilities. It's just that we pick out the specific things that we're asking them to do for us. Okay. So with that, let's dive into this. So number one, you must see the dog in front of you for what it is. You can't make a service dog or a working dog out of every dog. It's like, you know, pulling that kid out of junior high school and saying, I'm going to work you until you become a professional football player. Well, good luck with that, because that's a very rare thing. And you just can't pick anybody you want, regardless of size or drive or anything else. It just doesn't work out sometimes. So, so you must see what that dog is. And by the way, that's a segue to next month's. The old trainer saw that I don't think very many people, let me put it this way. I want to go in depth of what that means. What does work with the dog in front of you actually mean? And that's next month's subject matter, in depth. Where did that saying come from, and what does that really mean for your purposes? So you must see the dog in front of you for what it is. In other words, you can't create something out of something that isn't going to work. It doesn't matter how good of a trainer you are. And a lot of dogs wash out of working dog or service dog situations, especially if it's a commercial venture, or military or anything else, where they need the dog to be on a schedule for them. And one of the things I did years ago, the guys at Lackland Air Force Base down in San Antonio, where most all the military working dogs are trained, developed, etc. I was seeing them wash out dogs that I'm going, that dog is maybe a month behind the other dogs in its development, but it's just as good and better in some ways than some of the dogs that you're going ahead and drilling through. But they didn't have time to develop those dogs, so they washed out. They went to a small town police department or something like that. So that was one of the reasons I started developing that nose work protocol for my clients and for dogs like that, to develop them into, rather than to work with a dog that already has it, if you will, and gives it to you. So developing those dogs and developing that brain into what it can be was an important element for me on changing that protocol, that initial protocol. So what does that mean? So the dog in front of you obviously you're looking at personality, you're looking at the dog's interests, and you take note of those interests to use those interests in how to guide that dog to a different outcome than if it's just left on its own accord, what those interests mean to it as far as just typical, canine predator dog. You're looking at temperaments, not just personalities, but temperaments as well. And there's all sorts of ways to rate and look at temperament. So many of you guys I've shared, Dr. Radcliffe's stuff, Webby Bullard's, and my type of temperament, personality analyses and classifications. So in certain classes, got to look at the morphological influences. In other words, what is that dog? What's that breed? How was it bred? Is it a Czechoslovakian line of German Shepherd versus a West German versus a US, which comes from the West German? What is it? What is that mentality? Because each of those is different in the way the morphology of the body brain was developed and for what purposes. In the old communist world, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, all those areas, there weren't that many pet dogs, and German Shepherds were not developed other than for working military or police work. So that's the mentality of those dogs. Those are the ones that exist in those ways. And so they developed them specifically for that. Whereas in West Germany and the US and Canada, those were softer dogs, I'll say, not quite as driven, depending on obviously the breeding and the specific line. But typically they're working, but they're also show line and things like that, where they didn't have that in communist bloc countries. You're looking at the senses. You're looking at the capabilities of that dog for nose, eyes, ears, attention, focus, all those things. Main thing, you're looking for learning ability of the dog and what stage they're at in that learning ability. I'll talk to that in a minute. And then the developmental timing of when those learning abilities come along. So some dogs are a week behind others, as a 9-week-old puppy. Some of them are a couple of weeks behind, and that gap continues, but eventually up to a certain age, and I've seen them by a year and a half, 2 years, kind of come together, whereas they always lagged behind. Well, it's not that that's a stupid dog or an incapable dog. It's a dog that just developmentally, it's just like us, kids in school that don't quite get that, they don't get algebra yet, but next year they got it. So it just depends on their the maturity of that part of the brain for what we are looking for the abilities and the work for that particular dog. And in developmental timing, it's also the natural survival roles and understandings within that dog, how it sees survival. So the environment that it's in heavily affects the brain development and what it sees and what it focuses on. That's where we come in. So you must see the end goal for that dog. That's number two. You must see the end goal for that dog. So what is the end goal for that dog? Is it, is it an explosive detection dog? Is it a diabetic alert dog? Is it a search and rescue dog? Is it a tracking, trailing dog? What as a military or a police dog? So what's that job and what's the end goal for that dog? What's the environment you expect it to live in? It's not just the job, it's what environment does that dog get to go home with that person, with that handler? And we have to develop all those expectations. The environment that dog has to develop in has to parallel the environment it goes to live in and work. Otherwise, there's a disconnect, and the dog won't perform as well unless you crush the dog and just drill it into being a machine. And that's what used to happen. And that's a shame. So you need to see the end goal. Number three, you must plan the path for that dog. So where it is now, what age it is, what is the capability of this dog? What's the developmental stage? All of those things. I've got to plan the path for that dog, knowing what the end goal of it is, including its living environment, everything else. I've got to replicate as much of that to teach and train and guide that dog along to become the best thing that it can for that purpose. And purpose, a human generated purpose, is not a bad thing if the dogs are capable of doing that. So when we overtax a dog, that's a mismatch. So and that's where at a higher level of human use, I will say a lot of dogs are washed out, whereas they're very capable of other things. So we've got to be realistic about the dogs that you're actually choosing as well, or that are available or selected. So the plan itself, how to get from A to B and then to C. Okay, because A to B is just us working with the dog. B to C then is transferring that to another handler, department, whatever else person. Okay. Be ready to change and take a parallel path, because that dog is going to go, hey, I can do this way. And if the dog is giving you that, it already knows how to do that. So why do you want to stop it doing things? Tough. That's enough. I think there's a feral cat out front. So we have a lot of feral cats in the neighborhood. So if a dog is, if it's acceptable within the range of where we're going, sorry, got to stop this. That's enough. So if a dog takes an experimental pathway that still can be guided to that perfect end goal, or is a parallel path that enhances what we're asking it to do, that dog is already that. It already thinks that way. You don't want to stop that. You want to guide that to an end goal. Okay. How does this work with training? Everything. I want to reach that dog. My old saying of I'd rather reach a dog than teach a dog, because if I can reach that dog, that means it's already got this whole body of what it can do. And if I can reach it, then I can join it in its reality and guide it to a better end goal for it, the humans it's going to live with, etc., and its purpose. So teaching and training, a lot of that is picking out those things that dog already does well, believes, thinks, experiments with, to guide all of those variables to a purpose instead of just random elements. And that's really what you're looking for. Okay? Like I said, this is going to be a little broader, and it's really about you understanding this. Okay? The dog will show you the right way to reach the dog. If you're cognizant of those things, that's why you have to see the dog. You have to see the end goal for that dog and then plan the path. But the path is not always rigid. I do this way. If you do this way, you're just creating a machine that generally breaks down somewhere, instead of guiding this living sentient being to an end goal that it already agrees with a lot of that stuff. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using dogs. We'd be using monkeys or something else that have a different mentality about things. Okay. So 4, and this is something that I talk about a lot in a number of classes. You must be consistent. So your consistency is about how you present yourself to the dog. This is very important, guys, because if you change day to day, hour to hour, you're confusing that dog. Now, the way you present things and how you do things is totally inconsistent. And that inconsistency lengthens the amount of time that you and the dog can make connection and actually move forward with training, period. So your consistency of how you present yourself, your timing. For those of you who've had the online course 1, you've seen when we review all of your assignments that you video with your dog that you work, you've seen that quarter of a second where you lose the dog. Timing is not everything, but it's part of everything. So your timing has to be consistent as well, and you have to get better at that. When, what, and how you work with the dog, those things have to be consistent. And you, once again, the plan means you have steps along the way. What those steps are not rigid, and if you get past this step, you still have to remind the dog it's this to get to the next step. You can't skip a step in development, because if you skip that step, you haven't showed the dog that that's an important part of that. And the dog simply moves on without understanding the importance of that itself. And that step shouldn't be here, jump up on this. Well, if the dog's already jumping on it, that's a simple example, but it's about the importance of capturing those behaviors that the dog gives you, that you understand is necessary for that end job, that end goal, that end purpose. Okay. And honestly, this is really what the first element is. You must see the dog in front of you for what it is. The dog will show you the right way to reach that dog. You have to be sensitive enough. You have to have presence of mind to see what that dog is showing you. And if it's already doing things, it already agrees with it. There is no conflict. It's all about congruency through everything. So if you present yourself correctly, if you have a plan, a goal, shall we say, and you and the guy, you're the guide, but the dog helps you guide what that dog needs to be. Okay. It's not cookie cutter, and it never should be cookie cutter. If it was, I wouldn't have done this for almost 50 years because I would have gone nuts. I can't stand the same thing over and over and over and over again. I would never have done that. You know, I can't make a widget for 50 years, 10,000 times a day. It's not how my brain is set. Okay, so consistency, how you present yourself, your timing, when, how, and where, what you work with on the dog, and the intent behind each of those things. Okay, that's got to be consistent too. You can't suddenly change your intent and go, well, let's go this way instead. You just negated about half of what that dog's ever learned, and you've broken trust. And the trust is the most important thing. When you're working with a dog to develop a dog, whether it's for you or for somebody else, you're trying to gain the trust of that animal. You're trying to communicate and have comprehension. And you cannot have trust without proper communication, the attempt to communicate, and then comprehension from the other. And that works for dog to human, human to dog. Okay. So breaking trust is the worst thing that you can do. So that's why consistency on your part has to be there. And the intent behind how you present home life, not just what you work, but the home life. How does this dog live the rest of its time? Because working time is only working time. The rest of the dog's life, it's home life. Okay. And then also working life. So what do those two elements look like? You know, for my dogs, I've always taught them, okay, load up, they get in the vehicle, I get the particular harness for the job that they're about to do. They know which one it is, and they know, you know, for Mia, when she was around, it was, you know, explosive detection, search and rescue. You know, we did cadaver recovery. We did several things. Those were each a different harness for her. So it was symbolic. She knew what that job was. When it took off, she was a normal pet dog. She was never normal, but she was exceptional actually. But and then the same goes for Bosch. Now he has one general purpose and one general job that's kind of, I experimented and I really put several things together. He places himself between me and others. That gives me space. That's one of his jobs. He does it beautifully. A lot of the stuff I didn't have to teach him. He already knows how to communicate as a dog without creating conflict, but still creating space for me. You know, he does obviously medical alert of all types, and he does mobility assistance as well, and you know, recovery of objects and things like that. So it's all encompassing in that one absolutely brilliant 1 in 10,000 dog. You know, he ought to be world famous, really. And so I've been able to incorporate those things in one element, which is that one harness. Now, whether he has the harness on or not, when we get in a situation he knows he's working, he works. But the rest of the time, he's a big goofy puppy playing with another puppy and, you know, all of that stuff. So, and helping develop another service dog coming up. So Okay, so consistency. 5, you must have the presence of mind to understand what's going on in each moment because you are either agreeing or disagreeing with the behavior and actions of that dog at every moment that you're around it. You shape the nature of that animal. You're either actively or passively agreeing or disagreeing with everything about that dog. And you're also teaching it about what humans are like. So my job was to train the humans and educate them while working with the dog so that they become understandable to the dog. And I'd have to almost apologize to the dog working with them that, sorry, but we really don't mean anything bad by being idiot human primates. So I show them what we actually mean by our actions, behaviors, etc. And then they would get it because they're intelligent animals. So the presence of mind, and second part of number 5 there is you have to learn timing. You have to learn it. You cannot, it's like people who get into a situation where they're stunned when something happens and they just freeze and they look and, if something bad doesn't happen to them, then they go, then somebody interviews them later and they go, it was just like in a movie. No, movies try to be reality. It's the opposite, but people never experience those things. So they're just stunned. They don't know what to do. So they stand there, with their mouth open, drooling. You can't do that. You have to be, and I'm sorry for sounding like I'm lecturing, but your timing has to be as rapid as you can recognize, process, and respond to that, because that becomes an element of clarity. So the contrast between you doing nothing for seconds and the dog is already in a different state of mind, and then you either agree or disagree, not with what they were doing, but what they're doing now, then the dog gets confused. What do you agree or disagree with? Why are you agreeing or disagreeing with me doing this when you never had anything to say about it before, or you actually liked it before? So it's about timing of capturing that moment to either agree or disagree with it, or either enforce something or to celebrate that element. And I use a lot of personal celebration for the dog. I'm happy for you. Good boy, good girl. Yes. And that touch and that signaling instantly gets the brain on you, and it gives the right neurotransmitters in the brain to learn during those times. So, so timing is massively important in training and working dogs or service animals and the capturing of behaviors. So 6, you must capture behaviors you wish to have in the moment the dog gives them. That's why I said presence of mind and timing first. Now, the majority of training, certainly for relationship-based training, is about capturing behaviors in that moment that the dog gives it to you. If a dog is already doing a behavior, it already understands it, it wants to do it, it agrees with doing it. And if you agree with it, you capture it. But you have to understand, once again, the plan. Where does that fit in the behaviors that we're trying to get as a rule for what you are to do, whether it's working or home life? Because you also have to give that dog a chance at home life as well. So it isn't all about the working aspect, because then dog goes home. What does it want to do? If you've never taught it, it does nothing but working, then it wants to work at home too. And that's not a really good situation, other than if it's a service dog, and that's a lower level intensity than out there chasing down the bad guy. Okay. So capturing those behaviors, one, you have to understand the age developments. So from puppyhood, I start working with dogs at between 3 to 5 weeks old to develop them and for what their purpose is. At that age 3 weeks is when you get neural connections between the lower brain and the beginning of development of the upper brain, the cerebral cortex. And there's actually a lot of connections, and most of them are pretty developed even by 3 weeks old, which is a pretty amazing time. And so they're just now experimenting around and stumbling around and bumping into their siblings and biting on an ear, and the other one's starting to scream, and they don't understand what it means until it happens to them. So those few weeks in there, that development time to 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks old is a critical time if you have the opportunity to help that puppy develop to an end goal, because now you're actually forming the brain, you're structuring the brain to be that and to be a pro-social animal. The whole aspect of working with working dogs, training them, service animals, etc., is to create a pro-social animal, because the pro-sociality is about you and the dog together and the eventual handler or end user. So it's about pro-sociality between you two. Even chasing down the bad guy is pro-social for you and the handler, for the dog and the handler, right? So understanding how to be pro-social that's really what you're trying to do, is develop that animal to be the most pro-social, fantastic family dog that is also have these capabilities to be able to go after the bad guy or find a dead body or whatever it is you're doing with that dog. Okay. And so understanding these age developments of the brain capabilities and capacities. That's why I taught that puppy development course. Should be online soon. It's a long one, so we didn't have the capability of putting it in any place that you could access. It's 15, 16 hours of pretty intense material. So I will have a server soon, and I'll put all our content on the server, and we'll make that one available too. That puppy development class goes into pretty good depth on some of those elements, if anyone's interested. And that is literally how the brain, body, and everything else work together in literally day to day, week to week processes. So brain, body, physical strengths, and you're watching the development of those three things together to see what stage the development of that animal is in. What is its current capabilities? Because I want to take advantage of those current capabilities. And if that brain is starting to experiment, I want indications of self-given behaviors. In other words, I already want to see if that dog is experimental with crawling up on top of a thing that high, because that's scary to a little tiny puppy. So anything that gives me an indication that this dog is experimental, doesn't cower in the corner, all of those sorts of things, I want to encourage that and utilize those things for later on when we need to go chase someone down, or you need to jump up on this bed and catch me before I fall type thing. Okay. Those are the types of pieces that I used to write out, okay, what does this dog need to do? This dog needs to do all these possible things. What are all the scenarios I could possibly need a dog for if it were doing X? And so I'm looking for all those things. And lo and behold, what I discover then is that there's other elements that the dog shows me, if I'm smart, that that I didn't write down, think about, and we can use as part of that purpose of that dog. So current capabilities, that gives you what you can work with the dog right now, and future indications of self-given behaviors and actions. We want to start developing those. Absolutely. So that's why formulaic stuff really doesn't develop the dogs to a potential that they could. And then obviously taught behaviors and actions. We're going to teach them stuff. And there's general categories of things that we know all dogs can do, and that we want those elements too. So self-generated as well as human-generated taught subjects and sequencing. Okay. Which leads me to the next one, number 7. You must be able to sequence and layered, captured and trained behaviors and actions. That's how you get from this step to this step to this step to this to this to this to these complicated sequences. You start putting those together actually very early, because dogs are smart and these logical sequences make sense to them, but you're doing towards an end goal. Okay. And a lot of those sequences actually, for almost any purpose. When I originally got Bosch, decided to keep him, I thought I would do search and rescue with him until he was about 9 months old. And then I decided, that's kind of stupid, 70 years old. I'm not going to be running out in the woods for 5 days looking for somebody. With my dog at that point, it'd probably make more sense if I have a service dog than a search and rescue dog. So we changed at about 9 months old. That's when I started training him for service dog. And actually, there wasn't much difference at that point of what we were working with. It just changed the focus, the end focus, and the end goal. So, yeah. So layering, sequencing, the step A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, Joel Silverstein and I had a conversation a couple of years ago. He was in town for teaching a seminar. And Joel's, one of the previous Hollywood dog trainer guys, very good at training. He and I kind of layer and sequence the same way. However, I start with the beginning and go towards an end. In the movie world, you have to have the end first. In other words, you've got to know that dog is always going to go to that specific trained thing. And so what happens then is he goes from the back, the last thing, and then he sequences it backwards to get to that point. Thought that was kind of a brilliant way to do that. That's not what our end goal is for these dogs, because it's a performance that he must have at the end. With us, that sequence of going forward with these sequences can branch off to several different potentials, depending on what happens with the humans involved in that. So we've got to have a logical sequence to a decision point, and then that dog makes decisions on its own to get to an end goal of what its purpose is. So it's kind of the opposite thing. Training Hollywood dogs is starting with the end goal that you must do, or the movie doesn't work because it's a performance. Whereas training a dog to get to sequential points that make A, B, C, D decision, that takes us to this line, which is another decision point, and all these potentials. Okay. That's what dogs need to learn. So the sequencing is not a straight line. It's a number of decision points that dog's got to make. Kind of like Bosch, the first time he alerted on me, he had to crawl on top of me and say, "Hey, idiot, I'm telling you, you're sick." And that was a surprise for me, actually. So, And I had to think about him entirely different. Um, so the roles and jobs of the dog's final use for sequencing. Getting consistency is one thing, but getting comprehension of the partner is everything. So consistency and sequencing and layering then of, by layering, I mean sequencing, get to this decision point. Now layering is if you make this decision, it must be because this is happening rather than this. So that's a layer of things. And here's another layer, depending on what that dog does. Okay. So it's these decision-making processes. Unfortunately, for a lot of working dogs, they have a relatively short amount of time to develop them for a specific use. And so dogs are used in a very narrow layering. You know, they have a decision point of A, B, maybe C. And those are all pretty much the same line of things. So the dog doesn't have many choices to make. They can count on it, obviously, to do that job. The problem is, you know, dog taking down a bad guy, the dog doesn't want to give it up. So, you know, it holds and holds and holds, and you're trying to drag it off saying out. And so they don't get much of the nuances trained in, and then they don't continue to develop because the handlers are not the original trainers in general for those types of dogs. So, you know, there's a limited amount. They use them for a specific purpose. I'm not denigrating anyone on any of that. That's what it is. Okay. It is what it is. And there's never enough dogs out there for the needed, not wanted, but needed uses in any way, working dogs or service animals. And that's part of the problem is there's too many dogs being put into programs that are, I'll say, methodical, because it has to be. They have to develop a dog within a certain amount of time, and a dog may not be capable of doing it within that time. So there's some dogs that kind of fail at what they do, not because of themselves, but just the happenstance of the pressure on getting that many dogs out there. So I'll repeat that. Getting consistency is one thing, but getting comprehension of a partner is everything. Okay. So number 8, you must be able to recognize when you're helping the dog and when you're not. Don't let your ego get in the way that you know it all, ever. I know very little compared to what a dog is. Okay. And I've been doing it a long time, guys. So don't get in the way of the dog learning, especially when you have your plan and you're getting in the way of the dog actually learning something. You know, if the dog's learning and you see that it's part of that formula, part of that plan somewhere down the line or in some way that you can use, don't stop it. Encourage that dog to do that thing and shape that into what you want it to be as part of that plan. Okay. Also, be ready to move on. Don't insult the intelligence of the dog. I see too many trainers drill a dog to the point where that's the dog thinks that's all you want of it. And it becomes obsessed with that. I see a lot of Malinois being used that way as a demo dog. I'll give that example. And then they're tough to live with because they always want to work. Not that I know anything about Malinois, haha, but they really aren't that neurotic. Depends on how they live their home life. Depends on what you give them signals of how they should be. Okay? Don't insult the intelligence of the dog. Be ready to move on when it's got it. And it doesn't have to have it perfectly because you're going to reinforce that again and again and again the next day and so on and so forth. Okay. Be ready to agree and celebrate the dog's own learning give to you. Don't be arrogant. Don't be egocentric that you're the only one that needs to teach the dog. If the dog's already given it to you, celebrate that. And I mean it. Be happy for that dog and let the dog know that you're loving that. Okay. 9, never crush testing, experimentation, or innovation by the dog. Dog's going to teach you a lot. Dogs have taught me everything I know about dogs. People haven't. Ever stop the testing, even if it's something you don't particularly like. I don't stop the testing. I guide it and go, yeah, let's try this instead. Okay. So it isn't I never distract a dog, never, because then you haven't answered the question about what it's doing. Instead, you guide it over to something else. And then you agree with it. And all you're trying to do is get that much closer each time to where your goal is. So if your goal is over here and the dog is experiment with something over here, but it's pretty adamant about doing it. Okay, well, let's change that from A to B. Now, my goal is way over here for that, but that's okay. I'm not going to crush this dog and say, don't do that, because you don't know what part of the brain you just shut down. Remember that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to guide that dog to a better outcome. And funny how the closer you get to that end goal, the faster it goes, guys. In slow, out fast. Take your time with the dog. Okay. Be open to all paths the dog wants to take. That's working with the dog in front of you. Okay. Guide the dog to the end result you're looking for. That's patience, that's consistency, that's composure. If the dog is giving you something that will give you a great end result, celebrate that. It's not about you and your ego and look what I did. It's about helping that dog create that dog to its best possibility. If a dog is already doing something on their own, they already agree and they already have it. Now we just want to take that neural pathway that it created, boom, there it is, and it's there and it likes it. Okay, now let's take a little off ramp here and let's explore this little aspect of it. Boom, you still get that end result, but in the midst of it, now you're shaping that to something useful. Okay. Use the survival instinct. This is 11. Oh, 10, sorry. Allow yourself to be a partner in the dog's development and a partner in survival. If you're not a partner in survival, in the way dogs understand survival, they just see you as a taskmaster. And a lot of training of especially working dogs is the taskmaster, and the dog must please us. And so that's that representation of dominance over what I agree with and I don't, and I control everything. Okay, that gets a machine to work, but it also doesn't necessarily create the best potential for that dog, honestly. Could some dogs thrive in that type of universe? Most don't, I'll be honest with you. Okay, I'm always honest with you. So dog's development as well as a partner, and by partner, I mean it. I mean, be a partner with that dog. Don't look down upon dogs. When I say equal partners, I don't mean that we both have a decision making on where I drive to. That's not what I'm talking about at all. It's how I feel about the dog, what my intent is, how I sense things, and what I'm working with that animal for. If you hold things back, your trust level from the dog and from you is curtailed. And so you're already limiting yourself as to what you can get out of that dog. So being a partner in survival, that part of the dog development, when you're a partner in survival and understanding how they see survival and you perform in those, they trust you and will follow you inherently, period. So as an example, Bosch and I are equal partners in survival. That's how I sense and act and behave in every possible way. Sometimes he makes decisions that I've got to question. He has his reasons, and I have to figure them out. If not about safety of him or me in a inappropriate area, which is maybe happens twice in our entire lives together, then I am not going to disagree until I figure out what's going on. And then I'll say, no, let's do this instead. I got that. I understand. Thank you. So he's trying to help at all points. And that's really what you want to develop a working animal or a service animal for, is to help your partners. Okay. So that's really what it means. So live with, teach, and work with the dog in the way that they will need to live, either with you if it's your own dog or with somebody else if you're developing them for them. It isn't just about the job, it's how they live. It's their environment that they live in. It's the comfort level. It's the trust level in humans, in a human environment, because that's what they got to work and live in. Okay. And then 11, use survival instinct to shape and guide the dog for its end use. Understanding how dogs see survival, what their senses are, how they, and that's what I teach in every class, is trying to get that. So be invested in the dog the way you would for the best life of your own dog. If you're developing it for somebody else, you really should be developing it as if it was going to live its entire life with you, and you want that dog to be the best it possibly can. That's your investment. Treat that dog as a survival partner. Your equal survival partner with me. We're buddies, we're pals, we're teammates. And then watch for the maturation points and signals of what that survival instinct, those points mean for full development of a dog. Okay. So that's what I've got. Like I said, it was kind of a different angle on things, on the subject. I wanted to talk to you guys about that. This is lessons from working with working dogs that I've learned, working and service animals, and trying to give examples of the approach, the human approach, about how to teach, guide, and create these dogs in the best way, for not just for you, but for them. Because then they're more than willing to do that and more. You'll be surprised with what they come up with to help. And I guess that's it for the night. So we've got the Q&A live coming up on the 27th, which I believe is Saturday. Yes, Q&A live Saturday. So if you guys have any, for the last 3 or 4 months, if you have any questions that you want answered for the last 3 or 4 month live talks, submit them to Angela before Saturday, please. I know it doesn't give you much time, but we've got some questions. Otherwise, I'm doing such a fantastic job, nobody has questions, or I'm so stupid, nobody has questions. So one of the two, some extreme in there. And then next month is the 21st, Wednesday the 21st. These are always on Wednesday. So that one will be work with the dog in front of you, and what that really means in depth, the way I look at it anyway, the way I'll explain it to you. Okay. So I hope that helped or inspired you or informed in some way. That's the whole purpose of doing these live talks, guys. So I hope you got notes from it, and we will see you. Angela, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
No, that's all good. I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was good. I came in a little bit late because I had another appointment. but that was very good stuff. And yeah, I had popped out an email to everybody that does the live to send questions. I have received some, so
Okay,
keep them
good.
coming, and I'll get it added to the list.
Perfect.
And send the email to angela@crinstitute.com.
Okay, all right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you, and hope you have a good rest of the week. Good night.
Right.